Yeah, I was in the barracks that the Army Engineers built, and we had canvas cots, and we had straw mattresses, and there was a mess hall, and so I volunteered to be a waiter, and they made me a head waiter, and so we were there from April 20th, 1942 to June 30th, 1942. And then from there, they sent us to our permanent internment camp in Poston, Arizona. And it took us 4 days from June 30th to 4th of July. And we arrived in Poston, Arizona on 4th of July, 1942. We left Salinas by train about midday, and we started while it was still cool and comfortable in Salinas. As we got into the valley, we were getting pretty warm, being in the end of June, and we could not look outside because they made us pull the shades down. There were MPs in every train to make sure that we didn't escape or do anything bad. And the first day was rather not enjoyable, but different. It was something that we rarely rode on a train, so it was a novelty for many of the people. But as we went along, the Army had served loaded dry sandwiches for us with water, and that was our lunch or dinner. I don't recall what we had for dinner, but anyway, we had to sleep in the coach seat all the way down when evening came, and we went through Tulare, we went through Barstow, which is in part of the Mojave Desert, and it was getting hotter and hotter as we approached the Arizona border, and it was very uncomfortable because we were in the train for 4 days, and we didn't have our change of clothes. We had to carry our suitcases or whatever baggage we had, and we didn't have any showers, and we couldn't. Our hygiene was practically nil because we had no facilities to wash or anything. And however, there was restrooms in the train, so we were able to take care of that. But other than that, and it was rather boring because there was nothing to do but just ride the train. We had nothing to read because all the shades were drawn and it was rather dark in there. And so it was rather getting pretty tired from the second day on until we got to Parker, Arizona. When we got to Parker, Arizona, we were able to raise the blinds so we could see outside, we could see the sunshine. And it was hot, and it was very hot. But we all made it, and we weren't used to the hot climate because when we were in Salinas, we wore heavier clothes to keep warm. When we got to Arizona, it was so hot we weren't dressed for the summer hot heat. And once we got from the train depot in Parker, they loaded us in buses, which very ancient buses. But anyway, they put about 30, maybe less than 30 people in a bus and bused us to Poston camp. And what I'd like to backtrack a little bit, that the trains we were on were mothballed trains that the government brought back into service, so it was not very first class at all. It was just very ancient trains. And we were sidetracked. It took us 4 days to get to Parker because we were sidetracked every so often because of the Army soldiers, Army train that carried the troops took priority over our trains. But we eventually got to Parker, Arizona. And from there, that's the start of our internment in Poston, Arizona. And the weather was, during the summer and 4th of July, it was quite hot. It was over 100 degrees. And then from Parker, Arizona, we were trucked and bused to the camp, which is about 5 miles from the Parker, Arizona. And when we got to the camp, they came aboard the bus and gave us instructions of where to register and what assignment we would have on our barracks and so forth. And they gave us cots and straw mattresses to take to our barracks when we were assigned. And then when we got there, it was so hot we stayed outside. We couldn't be in because the barrack was so hot. It was just like an oven.
Okay.
There was 3 camps. Camp 1, Poston 1, had a population of 10,000. Camp 2 had a population of 5,000. And Camp 3 had a population about 5,000 too. So basically, Poston was the second largest community in Arizona at the time, because Phoenix was naturally more population than, but Poston, Arizona was the second. When we got to Poston by bus, the instructor came aboard and gave us instructions as to where to register, and we will be assigned certain barracks. And so when we got our instructions, we were given canvas cots and straw mattresses, and so it was very hot in the bus. The people were passing out left and right, and I felt a little woozy myself, but fortunately I was young and I was able to survive the heat. And once we got out of the bus, we had a little bit more air, cooler air, and we went to our barracks after we got assigned, and we found that there was no partitions or anything, so we hung up ropes and hung blankets as partitions, and so we would have a little privacy. There was no faucet at all. It was just a bare room, and there was latrines in between the barracks, which we were able to use. However, when we got there, the barracks were just barely finished, and the water system was not on a regular basis, and we only had about an hour or two to take care of whatever water we needed, and they shut it off after that because they had to conserve the water because the supply was not on a continuous basis. And so we would have to make the best of the time the water was available to us. And a few days later, we had a dust storm that came up, and we couldn't see the barrack next to us, which was about 10 feet between the barracks, and we couldn't see the next barrack because of the dust storm. When they built the Army engineers built the barracks, they used raw wood, raw lumber. So as the wood dried up, it left a floor space about 1/4 of an inch. And when the dust storm came, the dust came not through only from the floor, but through the window sills and when the dust storm subsided, we would have a sheet of dust on the windowsills and on the floor, and we would have to sweep it out. Since we didn't have any water, we only had to sweep it out, but we didn't have what you call real brooms, so we had makeshift broom, and so we took branches to sweep out the dust, and then we proceeded to build our partitions and to make the barrack a little bit more livable, and it was pretty trying, but when the evening came, it was still very hot. We could not stand it in the barrack, so we put our canvas cots outside, and we slept outdoors. It was much cooler outdoors next to the barrack. But after we were able to get acclimated, we were able to go back into the barrack. When we got to Poston and got settled, there we found no fences, no guard towers, because it would be foolish for anyone to try to escape from camp, because we were in the middle of a desert and it was so hot that we couldn't survive more than a day out in the sun. And so other camps had fences and guard towers, but Poston did not. And the Poston internment camp was located about 5 miles from the Colorado River, about just east of the Colorado River in the Arizona side. And since there were no fences or any restrictions, we were able to, the young people that had the stamina would be able to walk to the Colorado River and swim in the river or fish or whatever if they had fishing equipment. But it was a different atmosphere going. They were not in camp. They were, so to speak, out of camp when they were at the Colorado River. It was very tenuous, because when you went to the river, and it was still pretty warm, so on the way or coming back, we got bit by what they call no-see-ums, which is real small black insects that stuck onto your skin and sucked blood, and you got pretty itchy. So that's one of the bad parts of going to. But then in camp, in our camp in Arizona, there was a lot of scorpions. And if you left your shoes open and the scorpions would go in there, you wouldn't know it, and you'd have to shake it out before you put your shoes on, because they weren't big, but they had a poisonous tail, and so you had to be careful. Other than that, there was no snakes. There was I didn't see any horned toads, but there were lizards. But that was the extent of wildlife. In the wintertime, in January and February, the temperature was in the 70s, which is very temperate for that time of year. And other than the summertime, the fall and winter was one of the better times that we were used to. But it got cold too, and sometimes we never did have any frost, but it got cold. I remember between the barracks, between the latrines, there was a laundry room, women's and men's latrine, right in the middle between the two rows of barracks. There were spaces in between the barracks, so I remember there are many evenings when we didn't have anything to do. They would have a bonfire from the cottonwood lumber, and we would not sit around, but stand around and talk about different things and pass the time away. So it got cool in the evenings many times. In internment camp, when the Army came in to recruit soldiers, there was a big hullabaloo about pro and con of that, and there was, among the internees, there was a lot of frustration between the two sides, the yes and no sides, and which caused a lot of anxiety and fear. Actually, some of the what I called agitators in camp were put in imprisoned in camp. There was quite a bit of animosity at that time, and it was kind of scary at one time. But then things started to quiet down. When the questionnaire was completed, all internees who had to answer these questions, if they answered no, they were given 2 and 3 times whether to change their thinking, from no to yes. And the one that didn't change their mind, they were eventually sent to Tule Lake. And then all of the people in Tule Lake that were yes people were sent out to other camps. And so Tule Lake was in the latter part of the internment. They were the sympathizers to Japan, and they were eventually sent back to Japan. And but I don't know for what reason, but after a few years, when the war was over, they were able to come back, because I know I have a couple of cousins that were sent back to Japan, but they're back in California. After the war was over, they came back. And when I was reclassified 1A after my questionnaire answered yes, then they realized that I was loyal to this country. So when I got my induction notice, I had 3 alternatives: being in the infantry, the paratroops, or the MIS, which is the Japanese language school to interpret in the South Pacific. When I was inducted into the Army in Fort Douglas, Utah, the induction center, I was there for about a month, and my name never did come up. I wasn't assigned to any basic training camp, and so the sergeant asked me what my rank and serial number was, and I gave him my serial number, and he checked it out from the office. He says, "You were not supposed to be here. You should have been sent to Minneapolis to the MIS school." And by the time I was ready to get shipped out, the war was ending in the South Pacific, and so I was assigned one of the last classes, but I never did get to Minnesota to the MIS camp. A lot of internees in Heart Mountain they weren't conscientious objectors, but they refused to serve in the Army because I don't blame them, because they had their right. When you get interned, you're not treated as a citizen, so I don't blame them for not being able to go. But I've never been to Japan, and I'm educated here in America, and I know nothing about Japan other than what my parents told me. And so I answered my questions, yes, I will serve in the armed forces, and that I'll be loyal to U.S. and forego the Emperor of Japan. And so I don't blame the fellow internees one bit for not going. So bittersweet, because it changed the lives of all the Japanese Americans. In fact, many of them would still be in Salinas in the farm, and but the government forced us out and to go into new areas and new careers. And so before the war, there were many college graduates couldn't find a job because nobody would hire them, even though they had a college degree. They were helping their fathers, working in the field, or doing gardening, or doing menial tasks. And so when the war, when the internment came, it forced us to change our lives forever. Because, as I said, in the earlier part, I was able to go out to Lincoln, Nebraska, and I saw a different future completely there. I worked in retailing, and I would never be in retailing if I was back in Salinas, although I was an inventory clerk before the war. But I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my the field that I was in. And fortunately, I worked for a firm for 32 years, and I was in good health, and I was employed steadily, so I was able to educate my 2 kids, put through college, and so I'm living the American dream of having a home, educating my kids, and living a comfortable life. When the camp people first rerouted some of the water from the Colorado River, they made a canal, went through the 2 camps to to supply water to the different camps. Not only did they use it for agricultural purposes, but also for recreational purposes. The canal was widened in our camp so that it could be formed into a swimming pool. And they took a lot of cottonwood trees, they chopped it down and made shade, a shelter, and they made a sidewall of one other side of the barrack, of the canal, to be safe, so you can just sit there and not be in the sand. So as I say, during the summertime, it was a very popular area because it was so hot, and people swam, I'd say, midday to mid-evening. In fact, I would remember swimming there at midnight when it was still so hot. The water was, I would say, 60 to 70 degrees because it was so hot. And that was our recreation. They built a school because the engineers did not build any schools for the internees. So the people from camp built clay tiles, clay bricks. They made bricks out of the sand around, and they made bricks every day, and they built like cement blocks. They built the walls, and then they had the roof put on. It was all done within the labor of camp labor. And then the camp supervisor sent in like a superintendent, and all the teachers were qualified internees that had a college education. They didn't have teacher's degree, but they were college educated and were capable of teaching the younger kids. So they were one of my classmates was a teacher in in the school, and it educated the kids from grammar school all the way up to high school. In camp, he was a neighbor of mine in the same barrack, only in a third apartment from where I was. I was in block 2A, and I believe Jack was in block 2C. We grew up there in camp, and as I recall, we played basketball. He was a few years younger than I, so he was not on the varsity team, so to speak, but in the grade below. And but even in camp, he was doing his cartoons, and had his artistic ability. And then he went, after we got out of the internment camp, he studied in Japan for several years. And the outcome of that from Japan, he was instrumental in making this cartoon book, Camp 2, Block 211, because many people asked him, you should put a book together. And so that's how this book came about.